Let's talk about different kinds of knives. There are so many knives out there, and if you walk into like a kitchenware store, they're going to try and sell you thousands of dollars worth of knives. And I get it, I have a knife obsession, so I have a lot of knives. I love them, it's kind of my thing. But in reality, there's only a couple of knives that you need, and then there's a couple novelty knives that you can have if you want, but they're not necessary. So the number one most important knife in your kitchen is this one. This is an 8-inch chef's knife. It's 8 inches from here to here, and this knife will accomplish 90% of the chopping work in your kitchen. It actually, like, more than any other knife, this is my go-to knife. I use it constantly. It does everything from chopping herbs, to cutting meats, to chopping fruits and vegetables. Like, really, it's the ultimate workhorse in your kitchen. If you're gonna invest in a good knife, this is the knife you want to invest it in. So this is about a $60 knife. You can get a really expensive 8-inch chef's knife, like I have one that's about $120 and it's really beautiful. You can get them up to like thousands of dollars, but you can also get a really good 8-inch chef's knife for under 30 bucks. And the brand that I recommend for cheap is called Victorinox. They make really good knives that have been in use for commercial kitchens for years, and they last a really long time. The next knife that I want to show you that is necessary is this guy. This little guy is a paring knife. I think this is a 4-inch paring knife. They come in 3 inches or 4 inches. Actually, this is a 3-inch. I like to stick to the 3-inch because it's really good for like close cutting work. So like if you're peeling an apple, this is good for it. Or if you're working in really small spaces, a paring knife is your best friend. The other knife that everybody needs, surprisingly, is this guy. This is a serrated bread knife. Now, it might seem silly just to have a specialty knife just for bread, but like bread is such a weird thing to cut because bread is really crusty and tough on the outside and really tender on the inside. And if you use a knife that isn't serrated, you run into all sorts of problems of either ripping the crust or smashing the inside. And a serrated knife like this is perfect for bread. Even though it's kind of a unitasker, it's still a requirement because if you're slicing bread, you want to make sure that your bread stays in good shape. This knife also has a secondary use, so it's not necessarily a unitasker. This knife is surprisingly good for chopping tomatoes. Like if you want to use a chef's knife on a tomato, you're going to struggle with it a little bit because tomatoes have a really slippery like skin on the outside, and the teeth on this serrated knife really grip the skin and cut right through it without a problem. Got a couple other knives here that I really like. Some of them are necessary, some of them not so much. So it's really important to have a pair of kitchen shears. Now, this isn't technically a knife, but this is still really useful. And so what I recommend when buying kitchen shears is you can find them where they come apart. They'll have a little piece in the middle and they come apart for easy cleaning. And those are ideal because if you're cutting meat, you want to be able to clean every single little piece of the scissors. And if they're bound together like this, you can't really clean in between. Another one of my favorite knives is this guy. And you probably don't need this knife, but it's fun to have, especially if you like working with meat. So this is a stiff boning knife. And this knife actually comes from the Victorinox brand, which is the cheaper brand that I mentioned earlier for an 8-inch chef's knife. I love this knife because it's like 40 bucks. It really gets in between bones when you're cutting up a chicken or cutting up like a roast with bones. And actually, I used to live on a pig farm in the south of France, and I worked with a family of butchers down there, and all we did all day was butcher half hogs. And this knife was my go-to knife. This was the knife that I used constantly, and it's an amazing knife. Now there's a few novelty knives that are fun to have, but you don't necessarily need them. This is a Santoku knife. Now, it does all the same jobs as your 8-inch chef's knife, but you know, your 8-inch chef's knife is a requirement, so why do you need another knife that does the same thing? It's a great question. Some people like these knives, and you'll see that it has these little like divots on it. These are called a Granton edge, and supposedly what they do is they prevent food from sticking to it. In my experience, it doesn't really work. Food sticks to these anyway. It's a good knife, and if you have one and you prefer using it, then I absolutely say use it, but I still prefer my 8-inch chef's knife over a Santoku. Another handy knife that you don't necessarily need is this guy. This is a roast knife. So if you're cooking a lot of like roasts, like turkeys or like beef roasts or big pork roasts, like pork shoulder roasts, this is a great knife for that. This will glide right through meat, like big, huge pieces of meat without much issue. Like it slides really, really easily, like it cuts meat like butter. This is a great knife to have. Kind of novelty, especially if you're a vegetarian, you definitely don't need one. But if you eat a lot of meat and a lot of roast, this is a really good knife to have. This little guy, this is a cheese knife. I just think it's cute. You know, cheese is kind of a weird thing. Like there's like 50 different kinds of cheese knives because like all different kinds of cheese use all different kinds of knives. Like some they stick to, some they don't. Some has a little fork on the end so you can like pick up a piece of cheese. But this is like a fun little novelty knife for cheese that comes in handy. And then finally, we've got this guy. This is, see how it's white? This is a ceramic knife. These knives are wicked sharp, like scary sharp. They never dull. So if you have like a knife like this guy, like the more you use it, the more it like dulls down and you have to sharpen it. These don't ever, ever dull. I mean, unless you're cutting on like stone or something and you chip the edge, but these knives stay super sharp forever. And they can actually be kind of bloodthirsty. So these knives are so sharp that they cut through anything like butter, including your fingers. And so if you're using a ceramic knife, you have to be really careful to pay attention. Because like if you cut yourself with one of these guys, it sucks. If you cut yourself with one of these guys, it's like a whole other ball game of suckage, and I wouldn't recommend it. The other thing you want to pay attention to is these guys. They're breakable. So if you drop this, it'll shatter. And once it's shattered, it's toast. And if you ever do need to sharpen it, like, you know, over time they do eventually wear down, like over years and years of constant use. You have to send them back to the factory to get them sharpened. It's kind of annoying. People love these. Like there's a whole like school of people that are in love with their Kyocera ceramic knives. And if you love it, go for it. But I personally prefer my metal knives.